I don't know about "this is the word of the Lord," but I'd have thought "dun dun dun" would be a better place to end chapter 1 and that reading we've just heard. The particular version we used was taken from the Message and turned into a dramatic reading by Jay. And then I tweaked some of the words, having read Ellen F. Davis's commentary and translation in Who Are You, My Daughter? It's a beautiful book which also contains Margaret Adams Parker's woodcuts of the story. The scene has been set, the tension built. What will happen next? I love a good story, and this little novel is a great story. And for each of the 4 weeks of June, we're going to be joining in with the Methodist Bible Month and taking the Old Testament book of Ruth one chapter at a time. Like any good book group, there'll be opportunities for you to discuss your thoughts on the main characters, both in the service and in home group too. But let's begin with a little bit of an introduction taken from Dr. Rachel Starr's 30 Days with Ruth. If you want a full copy with all the materials for the month, then do email the office. Ruth, Rachel says, is about finding home and hope, but it's much more than a romantic comedy. Ruth offers new models of relationship and fresh insights into what it means to live out faith in the God whose generosity generates so much more than we can imagine. But let's face it, you wouldn't really think that from chapter 1 now, would you? Where we're already introduced to a cast list that has tragedy written all over it. Talk about it does what it says in the tin. I mean, I have 2 sons, but I do not remember ever considering that sickness or the end of the line would be great names for either of them. Our author is clearly preparing us for heartache and for death, an unstoppable progression of loss. That much is obvious. But more than that, hidden in the original Hebrew is the dreadful possibility that these 2 sons literally took their women. In other words, they raped them and then claimed them as their wives. We can't know for sure, but either way, we would be blind if we dismissed that as a possibility. Alongside the bizarre names, you can't fail to notice the number of times that Moab is mentioned. It's practically Moabite Ruth the Moabitess from Moabite land, and it doesn't take too bright a spark to pick up that this is a story about foreigners, outsiders, others. And in a week that has seen righteous anger flare up over George Floyd's death in Minneapolis, the other Moabitess from Moabite land has a name to make the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. Orpah, back of the neck, I can't breathe. Clearly this is to bring a modern context to an ancient story, but Moabites and Israelites were not friends, and there are real resonances here of a clash of cultures and ancient grievances in the overturned lives of this family and their land. Orpah's name presumably refers to the view that Naomi and Ruth have of the back of her neck as she turns her Moabite back to the Moabite family she left in Moabite land before disappearing off from the story. I hope a woman travelling alone made it home safely. I hope she found a safe and secure home to return to. I hope the famine didn't get her. Did you notice just how many times turn back crops up in this chapter? It's 12. Just in case you weren't counting, and we might have a quiz sometime. The question of where these women will each turn is high on the writer's mind. Orpah turns back to her home, and if we're tempted to judge her, then perhaps we need to check our privilege and remember that she has been faithful beyond death to her mother-in-law's house and only returns after much wailing to be faithful to her own mother's house now that it's all over. She too acts in good faith, and we should not dismiss her. But hers is not the story. Naomi and Ruth are now the only remaining characters on stage now that the introductions are done. With Moabite Orpah, the Moabitess, turning back to Moabite land, and Naomi, the bitter Israelite, turning her back on Moabite land and towards the house of bread that she and her husband had turned from so long ago, we're left to wonder, which way will the other Moabitess turn? Where is home for Ruth? If there are any words you know by heart from this little novella, it's almost certainly the words of this covenant that Ruth makes with her mother-in-law. It's often quoted in marriages and used as an image of devoted friendship. But as Rachel Starr points out, that it could just as easily be a desperate picture of a woman enslaving herself to her mother-in-law in exchange for her protection. Perhaps Ruth is clinging not to Naomi, but to a chance of survival as a refugee in a foreign land, hoping for food from the house of bread. She certainly wouldn't be the first woman to take such extreme measures, to agree to go somewhere far, far away with just the tiniest of hopes that it might be better than what she's left behind. A glance in any refugee camp around our world will tell you that much. Foreign Ruth, the foreigner from foreign land, chooses to stick with Naomi. Sticking with is another term that reappears regularly in this novel. It's the same verb that's used for marriage, as in leave and cleave, says Ellen F. Davis. This is a kinship tie that is in it for the long haul, whatever the consequence. Ruth burning her bridges and turning her back on what has been her home. Don't press me to leave you, she says, to turn back from following after you. For where you go, I will go, and where you stay the night, I will stay, your people my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. It's a simple act of determination, of commitment, but never underestimate how just one person's actions, even when very small, can change the world. I have on my desk a Rosa Parks doll. She sits on my desk as I work. Can you see her? Ooh. There we go. Remember Rosa? She just refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white person. That's all she did. She was tired of giving in, so she stuck to her seat. And that small act of defiance became the catalyst for the Montgomery bus boycott. She's often named now as the First Lady of Civil Rights. Rosa's doll inspires me to remember that it doesn't take much to change the world, that nothing we do is insignificant, and I found myself looking at her quite a lot this week. In the face of such determination from her daughter-in-law, Naomi gives up the argument, and in silence, these two broken women begin the long walk back to the house of bread, to Bethlehem. This opening chapter of Ruth opens up for us the nature of true friendship, of covenanted loyalty. Friends who go the distance. Friends who do not turn back when the going gets tough. Friends who will stand by you, stand with you, when even your name has turned from pleasant to bitter. When life has been so hard that your extended family and friends don't even recognise you when they first see you, when you show back up at home. Ruth and Naomi give us an example of companionship for the long haul, for the time when bread is in short supply and there's no money to buy it, for the time when death stalks our land and leaves us without family, for the time when the colour of your skin makes you an outsider, for the time when your hopes and dreams are shattered in the place you thought of as home. We will have to wait to find out how resourceful these two women might be. We will have to see how Moabite Ruth, the Moabitess from Moabite land, will be received in the house of bread. Will the back of her neck be safe? Will she be able to breathe? There are no guarantees. The future is not clear. The house of bread has not been kind to those who do not belong, and may not want these refugees eating their resources now times are hard. At this point, we have only the memory of Elimelech's name to give us hope. I wonder, do you remember what his name meant? My God is King. Naomi can't see it, but she has enough of an instinct to return home. Ruth is counting on it. Now that her back is up against the wall, there is nothing she won't do for the diminished family she now counts as her own. Ruth shows us what human friendship looks like when it is modelled on God's hesed, God's loving kindness in faithful action. Friendship, it seems, is a verb, a doing word, rolling up its sleeves and getting down to work. You are not my friend, nor I am yours, unless we are willing to stick with each other in faithful action. Last week, I shared the news that there is something of a famine in the diocesan coffers, that the bishop's mission order here can't be renewed, and I can't be relicensed next year unless we raise substantial support for St Michael's. I want you to know that we have friends. This week, I've had calls, emails and visits to my pastoral log out the front, offering support, encouragement and even cold hard cash from friends and colleagues alike. Acts of Hesed, God's loving kindness in action. For now, we must leave Ruth and Naomi in a place where they are battered and bruised by what they've been through, as I know many of us are right at the moment. But this is chapter 1, not chapter 4. And Elimelech's name hangs in the air as an offer to trust that God is king. Ruth invites us to join her in an act of faithful loving kindness, loyalty which refuses to turn its back or abandon the problem. The final verse of chapter 1 tells us that foreign Ruth, the foreigner from foreign land, and the unrecognisable, bitter Naomi return to the house of bread, right at the beginning of the harvest. My dear friends, we have a long way to go before harvest time, and I do not know where we will find food along the way, but I know that Elimelech, my God, is king, and I know Bethlehem, the house of bread, lies ahead. There may be times when our Naomi, our pleasantness, also turns to Mara, bitterness, but I pray that that will change in the coming chapters, and we must guard against it. I know that it is God's faithful kindness in loving action that Ruth models for us, and we must model it for one another, as indeed people have already begun to do for us. So let us turn our back on the place of hunger and loss and turn together towards the house of bread. Let us agree to work in the field of our Redeemer, to gather our harvest and to see what unfolds. In Jesus' name, amen.